So just explain what is this project?
Yeah, I wanted to do this project. So there's been several things I've been learning this year. And one thing that my professors, or one of my professors, has been really driving in to classes with him, so I've been hearing it a lot, is that we cannot learn what we've been taught to forget. And so for my project for Black Liberation Theology, I was like, okay, like what, I was just reflecting, I was like, what am I being taught to forget? Like, what am I being like indoctrinated with, like, in order to forget something? And it's like, oh, well, you know what, like society and the church has like taught me to forget like the voices of Black women, and like and not only Black women, but just, you know, like Black people's struggle in this nation, and like and then just like reflecting on my journey, especially like how much my faith has changed this past year, has been because of the Black women in my life teaching me what it means not only to be a white woman, but to be like a white Christian woman. And it's been really challenging, and it's been really uncomfortable, but in the best way. And I want to pay tribute and give like homage where it's due. Because we owe so much, at least I do, I owe so much to Black women in my life. And even historically, like, they've always been the caretakers. They've been the caretakers for not only their children, but white people's children. And they just aren't, we don't remember them. And that's, you know, I feel like that's the least we can do. But the thing with racial dichotomy in the church and in this nation is remembering them also is it's gonna force me and the white body of the church today to step outside of themselves so that we can look at ourselves, and that's what's scary. If I don't do this, I know I'll be robbing myself of a broader picture of who Christ is and who the church is, and I'll be robbing myself of understanding the Lord if I don't do this. So, first question, how did you come to know the Lord?
So I became a Christian at 22 in 1996. And I tell this story all the time because I had a friend that I was in college with, and I had to miss class one day. And I asked her if she can take notes for me. And she said, only if you go to church with me. And it was okay, because I grew up in a house where we were nominal Christians, but we would say we were Christians if someone asked us. I know that my mother only took us to church during like Easter and Christmas and stuff like that, but it wasn't foreign to me. So I did go to church with her, and I think the second time I went, the pastor said, you tried everything else, why not try Christ? And that was it. Like, I really felt, and I do recall feeling his spirit just, I knew there was something missing. I didn't have like this tragedy that happened, but I knew that there was something missing out of my life up until that point, and I just didn't know what it was. So it was very orchestrated in terms of how God just moved and used my friend to go to, to invite me to church. But yeah, it was, my conversion was pretty, pretty swift in terms of, when I felt like God called me to his family, and here I am 27, something like that, years later. Yeah.
So if you just want to touch more on like the intersectionality of be like the personhood of being both a follower of Jesus and also a Black woman in a Western culture.
Yeah, and I think, as we kind of talked about off camera, people seem to think for some reason it's exclusive. And when I say people, it's usually, white individuals and will think that it's exclusive. But I tell people, people have heard this joke where when God made me and God made us, he didn't just accidentally spill chocolate and was like, oops, I'm sorry. It was intentional, right? It was intentional when he made us. And so I take it from that standpoint that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. When he made us, he said he wanted me to be this color, and that color is celebrated, and it's not excluded, but it's included in my identity. It's part of my identity. There's no, you can't be a Christian and not think about color. Absolutely. Why not? Because I was given this color for a reason. So how can we always celebrate our bodies, or how can we celebrate all these other things that Christ made and made fearfully, but we don't want to include color? That is a westernized mindset, right? That comes from this idea of protecting ourselves and not talking about color, right? And that is not biblical, because that is part of our identity. He did not say, you're fearfully and wonderfully made, but I accidentally made you a specific color. He made us this way. Therefore, it should be celebrated like we celebrate any other part of our identity, right? And so I usually tell people that is a westernized mind frame, and that is from the flesh, that we want to do that. I think sometimes it's coming from a good place, because people want to pretend as if color doesn't matter so that we can alleviate discourse. But what it's doing is causing African American people and women, to feel alienated and feel like now you're stripping a part of my identity. Now I don't even know if it's part of who I am in Christ. So are there Christians over here that believe that color doesn't matter, but those Christians are usually white. Therefore, where do I belong? If who I am and part of my identity of Christ, who made me as a Black woman, is not celebrated within the Christian community, where do I belong?
Okay, so your husband's white, and you have a daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it like raising a mixed daughter, both in like Chicago and just in the church, and like have you? Yeah, just talk about that.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. So with Amaya, there's a lot of intentionality. And my base idea in terms of parenting a mixed daughter is that she's going to learn about her white background from living in the States. Just by living in the States. Whatever her history books say, she's going to learn what that means just by living here. The intentional part is to make sure that she is knowledgeable about her history, her Black roots, her African American history, to realize that some of the things that she's seen in the books aren't true. Making sure that she learns the music, that she learns the culture, that I'm unapologetically Black, right? So sometimes it's not even saying anything to her, but her seeing me as, I love your dad who is white, and I love you, but I'm unapologetically Black, right? And for her to see that, it is something that helps me see that she is going to be able to embrace both parts of her. And so I'm not very intentional when it comes to her being educated on who she is in terms of history. But I am intentional of giving her truth about her background and the history of Blacks and whites. And her and I will have conversations quite a bit. We talk about this a lot in terms of things that happen now, that's happening now, things that has happened in the past, what that looks like. What does that look like in terms of her identity?
Yeah.
Okay, so
and why you have wanted to do what we're doing?
Okay. For many reasons, but one, so that future generation can remember where they came from, and that their identity and their history isn't forgotten, not only for them but for for everyone. Yeah, I really think that if we're not brave enough to remember, then it's going to be at the expense of later generations, and we'll see the ramifications of it, and it'd be tragic. Okay, so could you tell me your name?
My name is Armania Bakers.
And how old are you?
I'm 10 years old.
And you're in 5th grade, right?
Yes.
It's my last year. You're gonna leave me soon. Okay. So you've been learning about Black History Month at school, right? Is there anything that really stuck out to you that you've been learning, or a particular person that you just think is really cool?
I like Erica in Walker. I think she's pretty cool.
Who is she?
She is a mathematician.
A mathematician?
Yes.
What does she do? Does she do anything?
She teaches upper classes and math.
You really like math, don't you?
I don't necessarily like math. I kind of,
reader?
yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's cool. Okay, so here's basically what I'm trying to get from this interview. I want to know what God means to you, like what Jesus means to you, all that. Like when you think about God or Jesus, what are like the things that you associate, or what's the first thing that pops into your head when you think about Him? There's no right or wrong answer. It's just what feelings do you have when you think about it?
Happiness. Happy that He died on the cross for us and for our sins. Yeah. And happy for all that He has done for us and my family and me.
What's He done for you?
He helped me and my family out of poverty. When we moved into Chicago, we didn't necessarily have a lot of money, but we did have a home and food. Okay. And I didn't necessarily have a lot of clothes either. But now I've been in Chicago for about 2 years. And also He protects me when I walk from school into Sunshine and then home. Because I walk to school by myself. And sometimes when I come to Sunshine, it's nighttime and it kind of creeps me out. But I usually just pray and everything will be good.
So He's your protector?
Yes.
Is there a story behind like how you came to know Jesus? Or do you feel like you've always known Him?
I mean, like, my mom would always, I could not go to church. My mom always made me go. So, yeah. In Iowa, we used to have these separate classes for different age groups. So, yeah, church was pretty fun to me. And I'm pretty sure Iowa is how I grew my love for God and Jesus.
That's pretty much all. But Armani, I love you so much.
I love you too.
Roses are red. I talk to you in my head. You lay me in bed. I am always fed. You are my dad. They call you God. I pray at night. You hold me tight. You are faithful and so polite. You make me happy. You make me.
first question. How did you come to know the Lord?
So I didn't grow up in the U.S. I grew up on the island of Barbados. And growing up in Barbados is a very Christian culture. And so from a young age, I attended church. So although my parents weren't going to church necessarily, my mom would send me to Sunday school and to church. So when I became a teenager, I started to get involved with youth group and church activities and so on. And that's when I really was challenged by the gospel. And I was about 14 years old, and I really learned about the gospel, learned about Jesus, learned about that impact, and that's when I came to accept the Lord, and so then I became very active with my church in Barbados and the youth group and doing ministry and so on like that, being involved in campus ministry in a lot of different arenas.
What images come in your mind when you think about God and the Lord and just like Christianity? And also, what images have you been indoctrinated with? Like, what were you taught to think that God looks like? And it doesn't have to be like in person, it can be abstract too.
Why, Emma? That's a very good question, I would say. And it's funny because I was just having a conversation about this and based on an article that I just read on Facebook and one I reposted. And so I was taught that Jesus was a white Swedish man and all his disciples were white and all the images in the Bible were that way. Because anytime I had seen any film or anything Bible related, this was what I saw, right? And although we want to say, we don't know what they look like and that doesn't matter, it does, because our brain works in images. And how we think in images before we think in words, and we construct stuff in images before we construct in words. So every time Jesus would come to mind, that image would come to mind. And so even though growing up in Barbados, this was still the image. My church was planted by white missionaries. And this is just, you think of the Jesus film, which has been all over the world, is very white. These are the images that are seen. And so just last year when I was home in the summer, so my church now has like a multimedia team, and they have a projector, my church in Barbados. And in between service and different things, they will have these images on the screen. And these images were all of the Jesus we always see all the time, the white Swedish Jesus. And by now, this was last year, I was already having conversations and engaging in these conversations about what does Jesus truly look like. After going to Israel and seeing what Jewish people really look like, knowing that a lot of who is in the Bible were based in Middle East and Africa, and what those people are brown and black skin, that the images we see are actually, we're not doing justice and we're not being authentic to the scripture. And we talk so much about biblical accuracy, but still we're not being biblically accurate when it comes to these images. And so when I was talking to my pastor at home in Barbados, I said, Pastor, why do we have all these white images? He's like, it doesn't matter. Nobody really knows what Jesus looks like and all these things. Because even as a black male, he had bought into it, right? And he didn't even realize it. He bought into, it doesn't really matter or whatever. We're not affected by it. But yes, we are. And so I've been having these conversations because growing up at home, when I was doing ministry, I would have a lot of conversations with Rastafarians. So Rastafarianism is based on Haile Selassie, who was an Ethiopian king. And Rastafarians, they believe that he was the manifestation of God. And one of the things Rastafarians are focused on is Afrocentrism. So they want to get back to their roots. They see Jesus as the white man's God. So I've had these arguments with them that Jesus was not white. And they see all these images of Jesus being white, Jesus being the white man's God, Jesus being the one who allowed colonization to happen. They associate them with the colonizers, people who brought us from Africa to the Caribbean and to the States. So the Rastafarians wanted nothing to do with Jesus. They had never seen a black or brown Jesus. They had only seen this white image of Jesus. And so this pushed them away from even Christ, because they're thinking he's the white man's God. And this is the same thing that has happened throughout the world, is that people of color can't identify with Christ, can't identify with the Bible, because the overarching narrative that has been framed, that has been spread throughout the world, is you see these white images of Jesus.
Yeah. We have one.
So are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. So how did you come to know the Lord?
Yeah, so I came to know the Lord when I was 15. One of my friends from high school actually led me to the Lord when we were both 15 in the 10th grade. So yeah, I don't come from a Christian family or anything like that. I wasn't raised in the church at all, but I did become a believer at that age.
So what was y'all's experience with the church growing? Because I know your dad was a pastor, right? Or he is a pastor still. So what has that been like growing up, and then also what has that been like here in the city too?
I can kind of speak on some of the background of what we're
Yeah.
doing. So originally, like in Missouri, we came from a very diverse church, and then we moved to Nashville to go to a very like kind of mega white church, which is a total culture shock for us. So even in that church, my dad was the head pastor for like a few months, but it didn't last very long. And now looking back, I'm just realizing there's so many cultural differences, and also just the way my dad spoke was very direct, and the church didn't really know how to handle it, and so they gave him a different position. But our family was just kind of like the token Black family for any like the photo shoots or like what else would we do?
Everything.
Kind of everything.
Yeah.
Because they didn't really have a Black family to represent. They had a lot of the kids who were adopted, but not necessarily a family.
Yeah.
So that was kind of our experience of playing the background, and also like my mom had helped cater for some of the events as well. And then my dad now has planted a church which is very diverse, and so my experience has been more of a positive one because I've been able to serve at my dad's church, but I know that's not always the experience for Black women in our generation. So,
and then our experience in the city, like church-wise, has been like, since we're in school, it's mostly like moody when we're talking about being around the people of the church, which is again being the minority because it's mostly white. And then our church here that we went to for most of our time here was diverse, and then now we're going to like a historically Black church. So it's just been a lot of different, like all white, all Black, then diverse. But then even in like the diverse churches, most of the diverse churches that we've been a part of have been culturally white. So this has been the first time in a long time since our childhood that we've been a part of a church that's culturally Black. So it is night and day.
Being at Moody has been very different, very, very different from the background that I come from. I come from not only culturally like a minority kind of background within the church, but also a more like charismatic background as well. So being at Moody has definitely been like a different kind of experience than like what I was used to before coming here.
So what has it been like for you here? Do you feel like you have a place here?
I feel like there is like a dominant culture, and there is like a dominant kind of way of theology that's more acceptable than others. I feel like there's kind of like this norm that I am kind of pressured to fit into. I always, like coming here, I did feel like I kind of had to, there was a pressure to conform in a sense. Overall, I have felt accepted kind of just by others that are like me and have come from a similar background, but overall, speaking concerning the school, it's been definitely, there's definitely been a pressure, I would say, to conform, yeah.
Well, I know in the beginning, I really didn't know what I was getting like myself into. Like, I thought, when I think of Chicago, I think about diversity. Like, I think about like just so many different people coming together and living in one area. But little did I know that Chicago is actually like the most diverse, but also segregated area in the States. But then also, like, Moody is in no way, shape, or form diverse. And so when I did first come here, I was really shocked to see that I was a minority, because it was rare while growing up that I was ever like the only Black person, or like there's a few times I could probably count on one hand where that was the case growing up. I was always around like Black people and went to a Black church, like grew up like in a black school even, and went to a predominantly Hispanic and black school. So it's like I've never ever been around like just like majority like white people. I've never been around that before. So when I came to Moody, like that was my first time experiencing that. And since the first day I've got here up until now, I've gone through a lot of like just emotions and just different processes of like and thoughts of like what does it mean to like be black in like a white space, and not letting that white space like define like your blackness for you, because that's a lot that I've experienced where like there was this box that black women are in, and people would try to fit me into that box a lot. And a lot of the times as I was being pushed into it, it feels like this pressure to like just to be the person that they want you to be in order to just like feel accepted and just try and like fit in as much as possible. Or you either are yourself, and then there's just a lot of clashes that comes with that. So that's a lot what I've experienced like while being at Moody, like even with being off campus, like sure, like I'm not living here, so I don't experience it as much, but I have 2 white roommates. And there's nothing wrong with that, but like there are differences in how we grew up and how we view things even. And so like our discussions about certain things aren't necessarily going to be on the same page. And there's a lot of times that I feel like I'm aware all the time of like what I look like and who I am as like a black woman, because it's consistently like I'm constantly reminded by that, by who I see.
One positive experience that I had my freshman year, like I think a lot of people assume that because you're black, you are, you know all of the things, you know, like about white culture, you know about your own culture, and they almost have this expectation that you're going to be able to educate people. And so that wasn't my experience. Like when I came here freshman year, I was learning a lot of just even about my own culture, and growing up in a white, like a white neighborhood and just kind of our experience, I didn't really know what I was for a long time, because when I was around black people, it's like, oh, you're white, and then when I was around white people, like, oh, you're so black. And so I just felt really torn all the time. So coming to Moody was just weird because I was just not with my family as much, and ReNay was here at the time, but it was still different, and I was trying to do my own thing, you know. But even like going to Embrace was really interesting because I was learning about my own culture. And so I was grieving a lot of things I didn't even know was there. I was grieving the pain that black people still go through today that I was even unaware of. And so I think a lot of white people don't assume I'm ignorant, but I still have a lot of ignorance, and also, especially freshman year, I had a lot of ignorance. But one thing I appreciated was a few girls from my floor who were white, and they would just ask questions, and they would be in tears for me. And I didn't even realize the grief that I should have about it. And so one of my friends, we're still good friends today, and she is just so good about asking questions and listening. And that really helped me open up with, especially with like my white sisters, you know, in a way that I really wanted to shut down when I was learning all of these new things. I didn't want anyone to be involved in it. And I just wanted to handle it myself. I wanted to process by myself. And there was moments where it was really hard, like, especially with some of the ignorant things that the white guys would say on the brother floor. Or I worked at Solheim my freshman year, and I just felt, I can't even go into the things that they said, but I ended up quitting the job. But it was just like, they were so unaware and they were so arrogant that the way that they viewed me, they would talk so poorly about women, and they would talk so poorly about black people. And because they didn't deem me attractive or deem me as like valuable, they didn't really care what they said in front of me. And so that caused a lot of pain. And and so over the years I've learned to, one, let people in on this area of my life, and then also especially be okay with crying with my sisters about it, and like telling them, you know what, I'm gonna stop being nice and just tell you that this pissed me off. You know what I'm saying? Because like a lot of times I would be like, oh no, it's fine, you know, but sometimes it's just not. And and my experience has gotten better, and I think learning to have more patience, I know it's only coming from the Lord. And being an RA and hearing so many, I love you guys, I don't know if they're listening to this, stupid things that they're unaware of, and learning that I don't have to be the educator every day, and I can take it and be like, hey, let me just tell you, you can phrase this a little bit differently, but I don't have to give them a history lesson. I don't have to tell them how it made me feel. I can just point them in a better direction.
I'll just share something from last night. I had a friend come and tell me about one of the guys who was doing awards, and she was like, oh, did you hear what awards people got? And I was like, no. And so she was saying, you know, this person got this and this person got this, and then she was like, and this person got the blackest white guy. And my face, I was just like, oh, that's ridiculous. I couldn't even hide it. I just thought, I was like, things like that are normal and people find it funny. And just the realization that a majority of people think that being black is a state of mind and not a state of being. That if you're black and you don't talk like how the black people they think talk black are, then you're like, oh, you're so white. You're like the whitest black person I've ever met, which doesn't make sense because I'm black, so I can't be white. So I think, yeah, just the reality that a lot of people feel that being black is a state of mind and not a state of being, so you're treated that way. And you receive comments that way. And yeah, just that's kind of a normal thing. You're reminded daily that you are black and that people don't know how to interact with you because of that, because they haven't experienced that.
Coming from both a black and Latin church background, like the musical worship, for example, during those times, like that we gather, it's very like lively and people are like dancing and like very loud and like clapping and shouting and things like that. And being at Moody, that's definitely not something that I feel like would be acceptable. Is like not a thing at all. And I think that if people were to actually like worship God in that way and celebrate God in that way, it would be seen as like abnormal or strange.
Yeah, my experience has been like, I literally feel like processing through this can be such like a cycle. So like there's times where I'm like, I'm doing fine because I have great friends, or there's times where I'm like in the depths of bitterness. And so I feel like for me, my experience has been good on the one hand because I really have been blessed with good relationships. And what I've realized is like your experience through Moody will just be completely altered depending on who your inner circle is. And and I feel like even something that's helped me is a lot of my relationships with white people are more one-on-one versus like a big group. And what I've realized, there's been so much processing of my past being here at Moody, and I realized like because of my past growing up around white Christians and groups, like I just have a hard time with groups of white people, especially if it's white women. Just learning to know when to articulate myself and my emotions and to explain things, and learn when just not to speak. And I feel like this year having white roommates again, like, and I had told one of my roommates who I was going into a room with, I said, we can have anybody as our third, but I don't want to be the minority. I told her that. I was like, I don't want to be the minority, so the other girl can't be white. And so, minority as in have 2 white roommates. And now I have 2 white roommates, and so like, I've had to process how I feel when I'm in like a white group, because that really is the majority now in this house. And it's had me process through so much of my bitterness that I didn't realize how deep it went, especially towards white women and like white culture, and realizing just how different I feel from it and why, and like, and learn when to teach things and when to like explain things, and learn when just not to respond. Like even towards affirmation, like I didn't realize how much like affirmation from white people annoys me more than affirmation from anyone else. And it's just because I think that white culture is fake a lot of the time, so I'm like, you're not even actually affirming me, so I'm not going to respond to you. And realizing like, oh, but then if my friend who's literally anybody who's not white says the same thing, it doesn't faze me. I'm like, oh, thank you, like it's a compliment on my hair, on anything. And so I realized like just a lot of my bitterness and how it makes me respond to anything and everything, and then learning, like after I learned that, learn to articulate that. So to tell my white roommate like, hey, I don't like affirmation from you because I feel like you're being fake, and it doesn't mean that you need to stop affirming me, or doesn't mean that you need to respond in a guilty way, which your culture tells you to do, but just hear and sit with me.
If
you were given the opportunity to make a documentary about, but it had to be specifically about Black women, but kind of the subtitle or whatever could be anything you wanted, or the focus could be anything you wanted it to be, what would you want people to know, or what would you want it to be about?
Everyone knows me, and they know that my focus is colorism. So it would be about colorism. It would be about the pigmentocracy and the caste system of lighter to darker skin within the Black community. And I talk about this quite a bit in terms of, many cultures, especially cultures with individuals of color, have been affected by colonialism, which in turn, it unfortunately has led us to internalize racism, which means we have a caste system of what is prettier, which usually is lighter, and then what is less attractive, and that usually goes towards the darker skinned individual. So I would love, if I had to talk about that, I would love to talk about that, because I think it's something that is actually it's pervasive across many cultures of minorities, but it's something that's a silent poison. It's getting a little bit more visibility, but this is a silent poison that's happening within the Black community, particularly with African American women. There is definitely a caste system that happens within our culture, and a lot of women are bleaching their skin. Black women are bleaching their skin to look more European, or to look light skinned, or to be something that they're not. So just to be able to, one, bridge the conflict that happens often between the lighter skin and darker skin individuals, because we're all such a beautiful culture. We're such a beautiful culture. So I want that to be highlighted, but also for darker skinned individuals who have been pushed down and made to think that they're not as beautiful because they're not closer to the majority culture. I would love that healing to take place, so that's my passion, and that's something that I would love to see in terms of a documentary for Black people. That's not just for Black women, but all of us, and the Black diaspora, not just African Americans, because it's very pervasive and different all over the Black culture.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
So your daughter Amaya,
Can I pause?
Yeah.
I would say now that it's a trend to be aware or woke or whatever about the racial injustices that African Americans have faced in the past and continue to face now, it seems that all of a sudden it's cool to be Black. And while at times it's uplifting and it's like encouraging to see like even people who aren't African American, but as well as like Black people just really embrace who they are, it's also sometimes frustrating, because I was Black when it wasn't cool to be Black. I was Black when I wasn't accepted. You know what I'm saying? I was Black when my hair was deemed as like nappy and ugly. It was called ugly. Like, so with the ugly things that come with being a Black woman and in that space, I would really like a light to be shed on that. Like, not on the things that like make us like amazing and great. I want a light to be shed on like the literally like the internal battles and struggles that women of color have to face. And even with being in the church and being ignored and not being seen as like an equal in the past and even now in subtle ways, I would really like for just that to be showcased. And it is kind of now anyway, so my answer isn't necessarily unique, but in the sense of that like a lot of celebration is going on, and I think it's great. But I think if people really like want to know and understand like what it really means to be like a woman of color, then I want like the nasty like hidden negative things to be like exposed.
Now you do.
Now I have one last question. So if you all were given, if someone gave you a grant for X amount of money and they were like, you get to make a documentary about Black women, but the kind of the sub context or whatever, you can make it say whatever you want, what would you want people to learn, or what would you want your documentary to focus on or be about?
in general.
I think I know. I would love if a documentary could focus on that Black women have emotions and have depth and have, they're not just this thing. And I think a lot of the times people experience Black women as their server or as the checkout lady or something like that. And however they respond, like, puts them in this box of like, well, this is how Black women are and how we've been portrayed as not having emotions, how the only emotion we display is anger, and we're aggressive, all these things that people put on Black women. So even if you show a glimpse of emotion, people are tied to aggression and tied to anger. And I would love if a documentary could just show the depth and beauty and richness that Black women have, and the strength and also the sensitivity that we have, and how there's so many different aspects and layers to us, and not just this one thing that we're here to be either the side chick or the best friend or just the baby mama, but there's more to us than that. And I would love the documentary to show the life and the beauty behind Black women.
I would probably do mine on, well, okay, I would want to have it on like the subtopic of confidence in being a Black woman, but like not, like I feel like that sounds really like basic because everyone's talking about that, but like talk about how we've been psychologically affected as Black women, and then talk about what it means to be confident in the way that God has made us as Black women. Because I realize a lot of the time it's like a child who comes from a parenting style where their parents kind of like neglect or don't pay attention to them, and they could still be trying to get their parents' attention their whole life, even though they're acting like, well, I don't care what they think, but they're like subconsciously trying to get their attention the whole time. I feel like Black people, and specifically Black women, like, because we were neglected by, you know, the master, we're like, well, I don't care what white people think, but you're subconsciously trying to receive the approval of white people all the time. And so there's this like role that we play into as Black women, kind of like what Reagan was saying. And so giving confidence for us not to be tied or enslaved to the roles that have been put on us. And then I think because we're enslaved to the roles that people have put on us, then that causes conflict within the own like Black community. So then we start getting mad at other Black people, and I'm like, that's exactly what slavery did to us, and we're still enslaved to it, but we don't realize it, and we're like still trying to receive the approval of the white man, and then like disowning our own Black community because of it. So showing like the psychological effects of history on Black women, and then showing us how to have confidence within being, not happen to be a Black woman and a Christian, or happen to be a Christian and a Black woman, but like God made you intentionally. He chose you as his child, and he chose you as his Black woman as a child. So show how that identity is holistic, and how that'll affect how you have confidence. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I think mine would be on, this is actually something I've written a little bit about, the caricaturization of Black women in media, and how that affects how people relate with Black women and how they see Black women. Because, I mean, as they've already stated, but specifically in media, as in television and movies, Black women are the best friend, they're sassy, they're the comedic relief, and you don't really get to see the sensitive emotional side, the beauty of Black women that is actually a deep character. Instead, you're given a very flat and static caricaturization, and it's not a reality. But because our views of people and how things work are so informed by media, Black women are often interacted with as if they are those characters in media. And so no matter what is said or what is done, you're seen as sassy or aggressive or angry, or your comedic relief.
I would probably focus where I am right now is the intersectional struggle of what women of color go through, okay, and Black women go through, because you struggle as a person of color, but you also struggle as a woman. And when you are trying to be successful in your career. You have a career you're pursuing, and you realize that there are hindrances and there are limitations in their systems that restrict your ability to advance and achieve, and that you have to work harder to prove yourself, or really you're not necessarily given the benefit of the doubt, which is what privilege is. Privilege, a lot of times, people who are privileged are given the benefit of the doubt. They step into a room and they're given the benefit of the doubt as the authority. But you realize that even though you might be the most knowledgeable or smartest person in that room, that you're not heard. And so you either, and I speak to a lot of women of color who experience this issue, very educated, very articulate, very smart, brilliant women who they're not heard even by other women in the room. They're ignored. They're just seen as that angry black woman, or their intelligence is questioned, their ideas are questioned, and then somebody else who's maybe a white male says it, it's like, oh my gosh, that's the best idea ever, you know? And so I think really looking at the lives of black women and how I believe they've been the foundation of especially the black community and society, like their resilience is resound, because even as they keep facing all these obstacles and issues and so on, they keep getting up and getting back up again and striving and trying and just looking at that, focusing on that and all the struggles they face, but how from a positive perspective, and how yet and despite of that they're continuing to strive and continuing to be successful and continuing to fight for their rightful place in our society.
Deep breath. Okay. What are my particulars made up of? Are they moments where I'm drawn into myself? Are they moments that make up how I see the contours of this world? Are they moments that wash over me from a cup that overflows from others' lips? Are my particulars made up of touches from you? Have they been tainted by others? Have I tainted anyone else's moments from this messy transfer? Whatever they may be, I pray that they make me seek my Father's face. I hope they shine light into his eyes. I hope they broaden my imagination and guide my hands to places that I could never reach on my own. Colossians 2:2 reads, "For I want you to know how great a struggle I have for you and for those at Laodicea, and for all who have not seen me face to face, that their hearts may be encouraged, being knit together in love, to reach all the riches of full assurance of understanding, in the knowledge of God's mystery, which is Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge." If we are able to listen to unheard voices in the church, our hearts will never be knit together the way the Lord desires them to be. And if we fail at this, we will never truly behold the full treasure which is found in Jesus Christ.